Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Books I Should Have Read a Long Time Ago, which have been desultorily chosen based on how I felt at the time I was picking them, but probably should have read them sooner. So we are continuing our trek through the 1001 Arabian Nights. We are now have a cover of the edition that I did not read, because I feel, because this is, tales from, this is not the complete thing. But anyways, so I am on book 5 now. And book 5 has a few things in it, not least of which is the unexpected prodigy of a story wherein, because there are a lot of stories here where some young royal person gets, taken away from their family and vanishes for years and never writes a letter home, even though they're fine and fully capable of doing so. For the first time, we have a story in which a young man, after he kidnaps his bride, she goes with him willingly, but, her father doesn't know where she's gone. He kidnaps her, takes her away, and then he sends a letter and a bunch of gifts to his father-in-law saying, "I have your daughter, we are married, she is happy, have stuff as my proof of goodwill." And they exchange letters for years until his father-in-law finally dies. And it's just, it's the strangest thing, because it's like he's the first person in this collection of books that I've seen who said, well, now that I have the opportunity, I'm going to send a letter back to this person so they know to stop worrying. It's like, nobody ever thought of this until this guy. So, that's weird. Also weird is the very interesting section buried in the middle of this book, in which the story goes, and this is, by the way, the third and not the last story that I had seen involving a young man whose father on his deathbed tells him, please, 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 do, be a good person and follow Allah's commandments and don't hang around with ne'er-do-wells, and, that kind of thing. Who, after a period of mourning for his father, allows his friends to convince him to go and spend a lot of money, and so on and so forth. So he spends money like water and runs out of money. And after begging his friends for help, and none of them helping him because they're all jerks, he has left basically nothing except one slave girl who is apparently the most amazingest person who ever was. She comes up with a plan. Pardon my throat clearing. I have a thing. She comes up with a plan and she tells him, you're going to take me to the local caliph and you're going to tell him that he should buy me for X amount of money, but that, if he thinks I'm worth more, he should totally pay you more, and then leave everything to me. Just sit down and be quiet. Don't say anything, you moron. So he goes up to the caliph and he says, hey, you should give her to, you should, buy her for 10,000, I think, dinars, whatever it is. And, but if you want to pay more, absolutely. And the king says, okay, lady, what's your name? And she says, Tawadud. And he says, okay, what's this about? And she tells him, I know everything. I know all of the things. So, O commander of the faithful, bid the ulema and the doctors of law and leeches and astrologers and scientists and mathematicians and all here present contend with me in argument. I desire that, and so he tells them, come out here and try to outsmart this lady. So a bunch of the scholars come out, and she asks, which of you is the doctor of the law, the scholar versed in the readings of the Quran and the traditions? And what follows is paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. I don't know how many pages this is in the, original edition, but in the ebook version that I am working with, downloaded from Gutenberg, there are more than 100 pages of basically questioning and her answering these questions. I will proceed to question thee of the obligations and the immutable ordinances. So tell me of these, O damsel, and who is thy lord, who is thy prophet, who thy guide, and what is thy point of fronting in prayer, and who be thy brethren? Also what thy spiritual path, and what thy highway? Whereto she replied, Allah is my Lord, and Mohammed, whom Allah save and assain, my prophet, and the Koran is my guide, and the Kaaba my fronting, and the true believers are my brethren. The practice of good is my path, and the Sunnah my highway. O damsel, what do we know? With what do we know Almighty Allah? With the understandings. And what is the understanding? It is of two kinds, natural and acquired. The natural is that which Allah, to whom be honor and glory, created for the right direction of his servants after his will, and the acquired is that which men accomplish by dint of study and fair knowledge. Where is the seat of understanding? Allah casteth it in the heart, whence its lustrous beams ascend to the brain, and there become fixed. How knowest thou the prophet of Allah? By the reading of Allah's holy books, and by signs and proofs and portents and miracles. And this goes on. The obligations are 5. 1. Testification that there is no ilah but Allah, no God but the God alone and one, for which 2. The standing in prayers. 3. The payment of the poor rate. 4. Fasting Ramadan. 5. The pilgrimage to Allah's holy house for all to whom the journey is possible. The immutable ordinances are 4. What are the obligatory observances of the faith? They are 5. Prayer, almsgiving, fasting, pilgrimage, fighting for the faith, and abstinence from the forbidden. And like I said, this goes on for 100 pages. First, she's, asked questions by this guy who is an expert in religion. And, and there's just 100 pages of these that it starts with this religious one. And list after list after list. What are the... what is the key of obedience? What are the divine ordinances of wuzu, the minor ablution? All of this stuff. And it's a massive amount of information, at the end of which she gets to a point where he's sort of thrown his hands in the air and said, my God, she knows more than I do, which is weird because, you ask these questions, so she can't possibly know more, because why would you ask a question you don't know the answer to? How would you know she'd answered it right? But he sort of throws his hands in the air and says, my God, she is, so wise and knowing and so on. And she tells him, answer me this question, these couple of questions. And if you cannot answer these questions, I will take thy clothes, she says. And she asks him questions. And when he cannot answer them, she takes his clothes. And then she turns to the next guy. And, asks... and so she asks the astronomer things. She asks the rhetorician things. The rhetorician guy seems to be more just asking weird, cheap riddles, but, whatever. She asks him things, and each of them, at the end of it, she says, and now answer me my questions, and if you cannot answer them, I will take your clothes. And so she's just taking these men's clothes, and there is no payoff for her taking their clothes. You'd think that she's taking their clothes because she's saying, and then I will give them to my, master who has just sold me, and he can leave with all of this really expensive clothing that he can sell and get himself back on his feet with it. No, she just at the end of it says, by the way, Mr. Sultan Caliph guy, sir, can you sell me back to, give me back to my master? And he's so impressed that he does. But it's weird, man. It's weird. Between, like I said, just page after page after page of her asking these questions and being asked these questions and answering these questions, and it just goes on and on and on and on. It's wild. And then you have, and this wraps up with a story. There's a bunch of stories in the middle about, people who are doing generous things, a lot of which seem to be somebody went up to this guy and asked him for stuff, and he said, well, okay, have my stuff. And then the other person walked off with his stuff. Like, there's a lot of that, and it's weird. But also, we end up with this story that starts off with the tale of a young man who is an incredibly lazy bum, such that his mother almost gives up. And then a bunch of people tell her, well, we'll take him with us, and we'll, go collect things and sell stuff for money, and we'll, divide things and give him our share. And while they're around, they find a ginormous vat of honey in the ground, so they collect it all, and then they decide they don't want to let him leave with his shares, so they drop him into the vat, the now basically empty vat of honey, and walk off laughing. It's very Joseph and, and his coat of many colors, in that they then go and lie to her and say that he got ripped apart by wild animals or something. And, they go on do their thing, and he gets out of the giant pot into a cavern beneath the mountain and finds this queen of serpents who tells him stories that, go on for, ever. And eventually, when he starts asking to please, 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 please let me go home, and she says, no, I will not let you go, because if I let you go, you will take a bath in a hammam, and that will be my death. And he's like, well, I'll swear an oath not to go into a hammam again, if you'll let me go. And she's like, no, you're a human. They always break their vows. And so, she is prevailed upon to let him go, and he tells everybody repeatedly, no, I have sworn an oath to never go into a hammam ever again. Eventually, his friend, grabs him and says, and basically emotionally blackmails him, and partly blackmails him into going into the hammam. Sort of in a, you will ruin my life and my children's life and my wife's life and everybody's lives if you don't go in here. And so eventually he goes in, at which point he is caught by the wazir of the local sultan, who had been looking for a man with his particular physical characteristics that can only be seen under clothes, because that was how he would know that this young man had been consorting with the Queen of Serpents, who he needed to take and kill in order to put together a cure for the illness of the local sultan. So they basically beat this guy until he, gives in and gets dragged over there, and, this serpent is sort of does this whole thing of, oh, you broke your word, well, God destined me to die in this moment, so I will come for, and it's just sort of this whole, it's this weird predestination thing where, she's just yes, it was ultimately written that you would break your word, and it's, it's a whole thing. Anyways, by the end of it, he has drunk a thing that was made from, her body that makes him the smartest person in the universe ever, and stuff. And it's just, it's weird. I mean, the stories in this are weird, but that one in particular, gets me. But in the middle of this, you have men's dispute with the learned woman concerning the relative excellence of male and female, which was really a story about who should you want to have sex with, men or women, and she basically tells him you should not want to have sex with other men, because having sex with other men is bad, because God doesn't want you to, which, I mean, whatever side of the conservative or liberal spectrum you fall on, it's sort of, yeah, but that's not really the actual excellence of women. That's the excellence of women as sexual partners, which is kind of not really anyways. So, yeah, that's pretty much everything, I think. I'm just going to walk away from this because, there's a lot of weird. Yeah, I will see you all next week. Well, with something that's not 1001 Nights. We'll get back to it eventually. So, see you all next week.